else's health.
Meanwhile, protesters descend on Parliament House in Canberra and demonstrations are allowed in Adelaide. Federal police bust an alleged online child sex abuse network, rescuing 14 children and arresting 9 men. And 2 police officers suspended after pushing an elderly man to the ground during protests in the United States. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Andrew Geoghegan. Thanks for joining us. Black Lives Matter protests are planned in many capital cities across Australia this weekend in response to the killing in the United States of George Floyd in police custody and in support of Indigenous Australians. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian is seeking to make a protest in Sydney tomorrow illegal, with police taking rally organisers to the Supreme Court this afternoon. A similar stance has been taken in Victoria, where incoming Police Chief Shane Patton says organisers will be fined if tomorrow's protest in Melbourne goes ahead. The state's Chief Health Officer Brett Sutton is urging organisers to cancel the event. And in Canberra, a few hundred protesters have marched peacefully from the city centre to Parliament House. A rally will take place at Victoria Square in Adelaide's CBD tomorrow, after South Australia's Police Commissioner approved an exemption from the state's coronavirus restrictions for protesters to demonstrate. Let's get more on the situation in New South Wales. We're joined by reporter Mark Reddy. So Mark, why does the government want to cancel this?
Well, Andrew, essentially the Premier is proud of the fact that New South Wales has really reduced the number of COVID-19 cases to only 4 overnight, and they were international travellers at quarantined hotels in Sydney. So basically she's concerned that there will be a spike. If more people are out and about, then there's likely to be an increase in cases. We know that restrictions have already been relaxed, so bars, restaurants, outdoor sporting arrangements. We know that the NRL is looking at having crowds eventually soon too, so it really is starting to pick up. And I guess with so many people going to this protest, we've seen the numbers increase from 50 to 10,000 expected to attend. There is every risk that social distancing won't apply. So at this stage it is legal to have 500 people outside, but no more than that. So the concern is that these health orders will be breached. Let's take a listen to what Gladys Berejiklian had to say.
If you feel so strongly about an issue during a pandemic, please consider expressing your views in a different way. Don't compromise anybody else's health.
Yeah, so we just heard from the Premier there saying that the real concern is that this could be another health crisis, a second wave of corona. So the real issue here is freedom of speech versus a health crisis.
OK, so the protesters perhaps indicating that they're going to turn up regardless of this decision.
Yeah, that's right. So the protesters outside the Supreme Court in Sydney have been very vocal about why they're wanting to do these protests on the weekend. So we know that the march is planned to go from Town Hall to Belmore Park at Central Station, and then there'll be a vigil there to remember George Floyd, who was killed in the United States. But there are other issues underlying this rally. We know that there was the issue of the 16-year-old boy in Surrey Hills who was kicked to the ground by a white police officer after he allegedly made threats of violence. That vision was very disturbing. We're also hearing from Indigenous elders about how there has been a rise in deaths in custody among Indigenous Australians. So from 1991, there's been an increase of 432 deaths. But that 1991 Royal Commission was set up to try and make recommendations which so far haven't really existed. So there is a lot of anger among Indigenous Australians and also non-Indigenous Australians wanting greater government action on how they deal with Indigenous issues and also how they are treated. So let's take a listen to what one of the representatives said outside court today.
We are not going to stop our voice because black lives do matter in this country. They matter overseas as well. They matter everywhere in the world, okay? So you will not silence us. We support George Floyd and the American community and everything that they are fighting for right now. And we support everyone that is standing up for Aboriginal people and black people all around the world. And you will not silence us in Australia. We will be telling you that black deaths in custody will stop.
So if this protest is ruled illegal, essentially what will happen is that police will be able to use their normal powers. So they will be able to arrest people, they will be able to fine people. We've seen those infringement notices of $1,000 handed out earlier in this pandemic. That will apply again. The real issue though is how are police going to tell who is there for a protest? Because you could say, well, I'm just here enjoying the park and not protesting. It's going to be a really difficult thing to police. So we'll just have to see what happens when this judgment is handed down.
OK, Mark, thanks very much. Well, in fact, the court is still considering that request from the New South Wales government to grant an injunction over that protest. We'll obviously bring that decision to you when it's handed down. Now, in Victoria, Premier Daniel Andrews has urged people not to attend the Melbourne Black Lives Matter rally due to the sustained community transmission of coronavirus.
Don't go to the protest. We are in the middle of a global pandemic. This is serious. Big events are not allowed. Big events are not safe. Big events will do nothing but spread this virus. And we have all come so far to manage this global pandemic. We don't want all the hard work, all the sacrifice that Victorians have made frittered away by people gathering.
So as we've seen there, both Victoria and New South Wales are urging people not to attend those protests. They want them cancelled, essentially. Yet in South Australia, the Police Commissioner has approved an exemption from the state's coronavirus restrictions for a Black Lives Matter protest tomorrow.
We have given due consideration to the circumstances that have resulted in this rally being organised, and we've also taken into account advice from the Chief Public Health Officer, as well as considering the policing dimensions in relation to the proposed gathering and the need to ensure public safety. On that basis, we have approved the gathering to occur from 12 o'clock tomorrow afternoon in Victoria Square, and we are also contemplating that there may be a march associated with that particular event. Whilst the exemption being provided allows for the gathering to exceed the numbers which are defined in the direction, we are expecting that people will still abide by the social distancing rules and ensure proper hygiene practices are in place. We will have police officers present who will have sanitiser available for the use by people attending the rally, and we'll also encourage people to abide by those social distancing rules if we see any significant concerns regarding that. As with all advice given in relation to activities whilst we're in this period of COVID-19, we are encouraging people who are feeling sick or have any symptoms of unwellness to stay at home and not participate. Our endeavour is to ensure that this rally can be held in a peaceful and respectful way, and that the message that these people are seeking to get across can be properly heard and done so in a way that does not impede on public safety.
Now, the Prime Minister is also warning people not to take part in Black Lives Matter rallies because of the threat of coronavirus. Yet protesters have taken to Parliament House in Canberra demanding action on inequality. Political reporter Matthew Doran has more.
A few hundred people making their way from Canberra's central business district known as Civic across Lake Burley Griffin up Commonwealth Avenue to the front lawns of Parliament House. And there was a large police presence here at Parliament House, but we do have to emphasise that there were no scuffles or anything happening within the group itself. That police presence can more so be put down to the fact that it was out the front of this building, Parliament House, one of the most high security buildings here in Canberra. Their message from the protesters was clear, that Indigenous Australians have been suffering for generations. And picking up on the statistics that we've heard debated quite a lot this week, the disproportionately high number of Indigenous Australians in Australia's jails, as well as the fact that since the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody was delivered almost 30 years ago, more than 400 Indigenous Australians have died while incarcerated. And one of the protesters addressed the crowd and said that while what's been happening in the United States, the death of George Floyd, that vision of the police pinning him down and his subsequent death might have brought this issue back into the spotlight again, this is a fight that Indigenous Australians have been concerned about for many, many years, for decades, if not centuries. And another protester said that there were a few rotten eggs in the Australian police forces that needed to be sorted sorted out. The message for the people that normally inhabit this building, the politicians, was very clear that more needs to be done to protect Indigenous Australians and people of colour and ensure that they are treated as equals to everyone else in the community. The Chief Medical Officer of Australia, Professor Brendan Murphy, has addressed the media in Victoria a short time ago, and he says that all of his state and territory counterparts are on the same page with this issue. They are concerned that we could see a spread of coronavirus cases if people are appearing at these protests.
The reason the state and territory health departments have regulations on gathering sizes are very sound reasons. The more people you have together, the closer they are together, the higher the risk. A mass gathering, even if people try to make it safe by trying to practice distancing and hand hygiene, is inherently dangerous because people can't really keep apart. They can't stop touching each other. We don't know who is there. We can't contact trace.
Federal police have released details of a major investigation into child sex abuse covering 3 states. Reporter George Roberts has more from Brisbane.
AFP officers have done raids in New South Wales, Western Australia and Queensland and arrested 9 men in a case that they say is the most horrific and possibly the biggest case of a child exploitation ring in Australia, or that Australia has seen. Now, 2 of those arrests were made yesterday in northern New South Wales in a town called Kendall. That is where the missing New South Wales toddler William Tyrrell was from, although New South Wales police have reportedly said that there isn't a link. 2 men arrested there yesterday allegedly had 8 victims between them. Now, AFP police from the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, or ACE, which was just set up in February, have cracked this ring. They say that the men were communicating or met on the dark web. That's part of the internet that's favoured by criminals for its claims of anonymity in nefarious transactions. They met there and then they moved to communicate on an encrypted messaging service, and it's through that Australian Federal Police will allege that they shared thousands of images and videos of them performing sexual acts on children aged between 4 and 7 years old. All up, 40 charges between the 9 men, 7 of the men in New South Wales, 1 in Queensland and 1 in WA. And Australian Federal Police say that 14 children have been rescued from harm in this case, in this Operation Arkstone, that's only been going since February.
And George, given police are treating this as an organised network, are more arrests expected?
Certainly the Australian Federal Police believe that there will be more people uncovered through this network. They've been arresting people throughout this operation, and the latest 2 being just yesterday. But of course they have cracked the communication, it seems, between them. They are going through thousands of images, checking pixels and trying to do victim identification from seeing what's in those horrific images as they've described them. And they've also made an impassioned plea to parents to be on the lookout. Here's what Assistant Commissioner Lisa Gale had to say.
I plead to the parents who are listening here now, many who cannot bear to hear this type of offering. Please do not walk away from your television. Please do not turn the volume down. Please turn the volume up. We need you to listen. We need you to be vigilant.
Assistant Commissioner Lisa Gale there, and she says that the AFP doesn't want to have to come knocking on people's doors to tell them that their child has been the victim of child abuse. But in this case, the parents and guardians of 14 children sadly had to. Of course, these 9 cases, 40 charges, will head to the courts next.
The Australian Associated Press appears to have been saved from being shut down permanently, and it's likely to be sold to a consortium of philanthropists and investors. The 85-year-old agency was slated to close after its shareholders, News Corp and Nine, decided to axe the business in March. AAP's Chief Executive Bruce Davidson says the bidding group, which includes News Corp's former boss Peter Tonner, have reached an agreement on the sale. They're hoping the deal will be completed by the middle of this month, but more than 70 journalists are expected to lose their jobs. A Melbourne police officer found guilty of bashing a man in Melbourne's outer southeast more than 4 years ago has been spared jail. Karen Percy reports from the Victorian County Court.
Senior Constable Ross Fowler may well keep his job despite being found guilty of recklessly causing injury. This relates to an incident in February 2016 in Frankston when he and his partner were called to a family violence call out at a home in Frankston North. They confronted a man there called Brian Jackson, and during an incident there they pepper sprayed him, but also Ross Fowler struck him several times with his torch. And even after Brian Jackson was handcuffed and under arrest, Mr Fowler kicked him in what was a gratuitous kick, said Judge Trevor Raitt, who has ordered Fowler to pay a $10,000 fine. Now, during the trial, CCTV footage was played to the jury, and Judge Raitt made reference to that today in his sentencing. The CCTV footage depicts Mr Jackson trying to get away from you, not seeking to confront you, because Ross Fowler, through his defence lawyers, through this process, has said that he felt constantly threatened by Mr Jackson, and that was why he responded in the way he did. Judge Raitt said while the 12-year veteran of the force had shown little remorse, this assault was at a low level, and he took into account Fowler's good character, and in fact there were some 30 character references submitted to the court on Mr Fowler's behalf. But Judge Raitt did say that the community is entitled to trust, and even in these challenging circumstances, police officers must act lawfully.
Queensland Emergency Services are investigating the cause of a house fire that's killed a 72-year-old man in Brisbane South. Tim Swanston reports.
Nearby residents have described the panic and chaos last night when a fire broke out at a house here at Gregory Street in Acacia Ridge. Emergency crews were called just before 10 o'clock last night to the blaze, which was mostly contained inside the house. The couple in their 70s were still inside. A neighbour has managed to help the 71-year-old woman out of the house. Locals tried to extinguish the fire with whatever they had on hand, but say the blaze kept reigniting. 4 QFES crews put out the fire, but they found the body of the 72-year-old man still inside. The woman and neighbour were taken to hospital for minor injuries.
I understand there were a lot of people assisting last night with the garden hoses and extinguishers. Early in the night, so lots of people were still up and about, so that's good to see.
Got told the house was on fire, raced over, raced in, got the lady out, went back to try to get the old fella out, but the flames just pushed me back. Pushed the garden hose through the side window and grabbed the 2 fire extinguishers I had here and used them to try to put out the fire while the
crime scene remains in place as scientific officers, along with QFES Fire Investigation Unit, have been combing the scene to examine the cause of the fire.
A primary school in Melbourne's north has been closed for cleaning after a student tested positive for coronavirus. It is one of 3 new cases recorded in Victoria over the past 24 hours. Reporter Stephanie Ferrier has more.
The prep student at Newbury Primary School in Craigieburn in Melbourne's northern suburbs is one of 3 new cases of coronavirus detected in Victoria in the past 24 hours. The other 2 are returned travellers from overseas who are already serving out their quarantine in hotels here. Now, this school has been closed as a result of this coronavirus confirmation, and it will be subjected to a deep clean, particularly in the prep students' classroom and in the common areas. And this will also allow health authorities time to be able to identify close contacts of this student and test them as well as isolate them for 14 days. Here's what the Chief Medical Officer of Victoria, Professor Brett Sutton, had to say about this case.
A prep student who was at the school without symptoms late last week, but developed symptoms over the weekend, was tested on Wednesday, notified to DHHS yesterday, and the school will shut today.
Professor Sutton says they're still investigating exactly how this child picked up coronavirus in the community and exactly where he might have got the virus from. But he's importantly stressed that this is not a case of transmission within the school, and in fact the risk of transmission within schools remains very low, which is especially relevant as all students prepare to return to classrooms as of next Tuesday, with those remaining grades going back to face-to-face learning. He does say that there is a small level of low-level community transmission, particularly in Melbourne's western and northern suburbs, so going from Keilor Downs in the west, stretching across to Fawkner in the north, and then further north into Craigieburn. And he says that there have been a couple of cases in these hotspots within the past couple of weeks. So in these areas, it's more important than ever for anybody who has potentially mild symptoms to go and get themselves tested and cleared.
Never before have we been so vigilant in keeping our hands clean. But will we maintain such attention to hygiene practices in a post-COVID world? Infectious diseases specialist from ANU, Professor Peter Cuneo, joins us now from Canberra to discuss that. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
So we've essentially become compulsive hand washers and sanitisers in this current environment. Will this continue, this change of behaviour? I'll get to that in a moment, but first let's look at the situation at the moment. Has that change in behaviour, how has it affected keeping those infection rates so low?
Well, we've seen a dramatic drop in not only COVID transmission in the community and COVID cases in Australia, but if we look at other viruses that are transmitted exactly the same way, and that's by droplets predominantly, when people cough or sneeze and dropping within 1.5 metres, 2 metres. Influenza, the common cold virus, parainfluenza, they've also dramatically dropped. So what people are doing at the moment, which is physical distancing and hand hygiene and not going to work when you're sick, that seems to have made a huge amount of difference for not only COVID, but the common viruses that spread this time of year every year, and particularly more so in winter.
Yeah, well, that's right. You mentioned winter, obviously. That is cold and flu season, so you're expecting to see very low rates of infection among those diseases then?
I think if people keep on doing the right things, and that's washing their hands, hand hygiene with alcohol, hand rub, but particularly keeping physical distances, then I would think that we should see a dramatic drop in most of those viruses. I mean, I would see we should see a 50 or 70% reduction of what we saw last winter. And that's why it's really important to keep on doing the right things this winter. We haven't gone through a winter yet. Winter is a danger period for spreading respiratory viruses, including COVID. So a lot of the things we're doing, we're going to have to continue until at least September or October.
Peter, just explain to us again how washing our hands effectively and sanitising it protects us from catching those diseases.
Most of COVID is spread by what we call droplets, and they're called droplets because they drop. In other words, if I cough or sneeze or even shout if I'm asymptomatic or speak loudly, a certain amount of saliva particles get, spread out in front of me. Most fall to the ground within 1.5 metres, or fall on my face if I'm closer than that. And if I get it in my eyes, my nose, or on my mouth, it can cause infection, or I can breathe it in. But it also drops to surfaces. And so when we touch those surfaces, if we then touch our eye, our nose, or our mouth, we can self-inoculate ourselves. And so that's why it's so important to wash your hands, because if you don't wash your hands before you touch your face, then you run the risk that you may self-inoculate yourself with the virus if you've picked it up from a surface. So both the physical distancing and the hand hygiene, hand washing, are important components to minimise our chances of picking up not only the COVID virus, but lots of other viruses as well.
So as well as changing our behaviour permanently, do we also need to change our environment? You mentioned there to avoid touching surfaces, for instance. Perhaps changing the design of public toilets, for instance, where you don't have to touch the door and the like.
Well, yeah, I think there's lots of designs we need to look at, including in public hospitals. We need much more single rooms with their own bathroom facilities that don't, you're not sharing it with 2 or 4 other people. But it's the same everywhere. What we need is people to be able to have their own facilities as much as possible, but very importantly, we need surfaces that are easy to clean and easy to keep clean. And often we don't do that. Cost cutting comes around, so we put in less hand basins, or even with the hand basins, can you operate them with your knee instead of touching them with your hands, or can they dependably work by just having a waving motion? And how do we get in and out without retouching our hands on surfaces? There's a lot of design things that we need to look at not only in public toilets and hospitals, but in the workplace. How do we keep people separated? How do we keep their hands as clean as is reasonable? And how do we minimise the chance that their hands might get contaminated in the first place?
Peter, we have been told in the past that perhaps our obsessiveness with cleanliness has contributed to a rise in allergies. Is there any proof in that? I know it's called the hygiene hypothesis, and you'll tell me, well, it is just that, isn't it, a hypothesis? But there are concerns perhaps that our lack of exposure to bugs, particularly early on in life, leads to autoimmune diseases.
Well, that's true. There is an argument that if you don't have contact with a lot of bacteria, you may actually get more autoimmune diseases. As far as I can see, the main basis of that theory is to do with having worms in your bowel or not in your bowel. When you have a lot of those worms, be it whipworm, pinworm, or even hookworm, there seems to be evidence then that it can decrease your chance of celiac disease or a lot of autoimmune problems in your bowel, such as Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. But to extend that to everything, asthma and everything else, it becomes a problem, because at the end of the day, the biggest savings in health have been immunisation, but the next, and probably the bigger one, has been having clean water and clean food. We've got a pandemic now. In the 1800s, they had a pandemic every 5 or 10 years with cholera, typhoid, and lots of waterborne diseases where they didn't know how it was transmitted. And the biggest thing that has helped human health is having clean water, and that kept the bad bugs from us. Now, we can overdo it. We can, get so obsessive compulsive that we're immobilised. And equally, we can use too many chemicals. So if we over-clean houses with chemicals that persist and go in the rivers, that's not good either. But basic hygiene and making sure we've got safe water, safe foods, making sure we don't let the salmonella grow on the chicken because we've left it out of the bench, and don't, do all those sorts of things, we are better off not getting those illnesses. And we still, if we live life normally, get exposed to a lot less nasty bugs, such as coagulase negative staph and a lot of bugs that live on us normally that protect us against the baddies. So we don't have to live in a sterile bubble, but equally we need to take reasonable precautions, and one of them is washing your hands.
And is it your expectation, even if we do get a vaccine for the coronavirus, that we'll need to practice this cleanliness?
Yeah, just as an example, in hospitals we've seen less nasty bugs such as MRSA, VRE, because people are adhering more to the things they should be doing all the time but frequently aren't. And if you look at the workplace, how many people came to work when they were sick? With influenza or the virus, and made other people at work sick, their staff members and in hospitals, even patients. So there's a lot of things we've been doing, soldiering on, activities that we should not have been doing. Now that COVID is here, the consequences are 10 times worse than influenza. It's got a much higher mortality. And even if you look at the outbreaks of COVID around Australia and even in schools, it's often because somebody who is sick went to work, spread it to other staff members, who then spread it to patients or students, etc. So we need to change our behaviour, washing hands, physically distancing much more in winter, but particularly don't go to work or use public transport if you're sick.
Professor Peter Cuneo, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
To some breaking news, and rugby league fans will be allowed back into stadiums from next weekend. The NRL has secured permission from the New South Wales government for the move. The ruling will allow groups of up to 50 people per room to attend games in stadium corporate facilities. The guidelines will be in line with restrictions on pubs and restaurants at a ratio of 1 person every 4 square metres. Well, there are reasons to celebrate in the Northern Territory with the easing of restrictions. Melissa McKay reports from Darwin.
Well, stage 3 of the Northern Territory's new normal is underway now. Pubs and bars are able to serve alcohol with no time restrictions nor a requirement to order food. Some licensed gaming will get underway today as well as live music, theatres, cinemas, everything able to open so long as social distancing measures are adhered to. Beauty parlours will also be able to resume facial services. They have been open for a couple of weeks, but unable to perform facial services. That will all get underway today as well. And sporting clubs will be able to resume competition. We'll see soccer kicking off this afternoon, as well as the first races at the Turf Club tomorrow morning. And those sporting events will be allowed to have spectators. Crowds of up to 500 people will be allowed so long as social distancing measures are in place. This weekend has also seen the lifting of internal border restrictions. Biosecurity zones across the Northern Territory have been lifted. Those were in place since March to protect remote communities. People in those remote communities were essentially locked either in or out of those remote communities. That lifted at midnight last night, and we've already seen a few people heading into town today. It also means that a lot of Territorians will be able to get out of town and into some of those really popular camping spots and a lot of those national parks for the long weekend. We will still have to wait a couple of weeks to get into Kakadu National Park, and we're still waiting to see when Uluru will reopen to visitors. The Northern Territory's Chief Minister, however, has said that borders, state borders, will be the last to open, and we're still waiting on a date for those.
The top stories from ABC News. The New South Wales Premier is seeking a court injunction to stop a Black Lives Matter protest in Sydney tomorrow over coronavirus fears. Premier Gladys Berejiklian says rally organisers have failed to negotiate a COVID-safe plan with police. The matter is being heard in the New South Wales Supreme Court this afternoon. Hundreds of protesters have taken to the front lawns of Parliament House in Canberra, highlighting the plight of Indigenous Australians and people of colour. And in South Australia, police have allowed a rally to go ahead in Adelaide tomorrow, provided protesters maintain physical distancing. 9 men have been arrested over what federal police allege is one of Australia's largest online child abuse networks. The investigation began in February after a tip-off from American authorities. Warrants were executed in New South Wales, Queensland and Western Australia. It's alleged those involved had abused children and recorded the images to share with others. And 2 police officers in the United States have been suspended after a video emerged showing police shoving a 75-year-old man during a protest. The images show the man falling backwards and hitting his head on the pavement. He's then seen bleeding as officers walk past. 2 medics treated the man, who is in hospital in a stable condition. Protests are expected to take place in some cities across Australia tomorrow, despite calls for people not to attend on health grounds. Jolina Sinanen from the University of Sydney says, given the context and safety risks of large gatherings during the pandemic, online activism can be an effective alternative.
It's manifested in quite a few ways. Twitter is the usual go-to medium for the updates and for the information about the organisation of protests, but also for the documentation of police brutality. This week, we saw a little bit of a fog of war on Instagram with Blackout Tuesday or hashtag Blackout Tuesday that went from being an initiative started by employees of a music record label to everyday people just posting a black square with the hashtag Blackout Tuesday, but also the hashtag Black Lives Matter, which conflated the two movements and caused a lot of criticism on both sides towards the people who were posting, which then resulted in people withdrawing posts or sort of retreating from the message that they subscribed to or the message they thought that they were spreading. So there's a lot of fogginess at the moment this week with online political engagement to online activism.
But I guess that's the nature of a community forum, isn't it? Particularly given it's global. Is this particular protest an expression we're seeing at the moment organised, or is it purely based on individual contributions?
I think what is unique about this week, both with Black Lives Matter that we're seeing in the US, but also with the immense, and I want to really emphasise this, Andrew, the immense global popularity of Blackout Tuesday was that the majority of posts were not posted by celebrities. They were not posted by micro-celebrities. They were posted by millions of individuals from countries around the world. Millions of individuals who saw the killing of George Floyd as one individual that was linked to very deep structural inequalities that are pervasive based on race, that are based in many countries. And I also want to emphasize that after this is so much tied to last week with the surpassing of 100,000 deaths in the US from COVID-19 as well. People are feeling particularly helpless. People are feeling that they have not many options watching this global devastation. And from COVID-19, these are emotions that people have not really, especially for the social media generation, have not experienced before. They don't know what to do with a global pandemic. But the killing by police of yet another African-American man, this is a very familiar story. This is a very familiar incident that we have seen over years. And it's an incident that we know how to respond to. And I think the intimate linking of COVID-19, the lockdowns, people coming out of lockdowns, where every aspect of life has been lived online, from work to education to connecting with our closest loved ones, to political news and political engagement. These two things have just come together in a particularly explosive way that I don't think is particularly organised as one movement. I'm talking about Blackout Tuesday here. I'm talking about the global response to it. It is that everybody who is posting comes from all walks of life and come from very different circumstances, and this is their initial response.
In the US state of New York, 2 Buffalo police officers have been suspended without pay for pushing a 75-year-old man to the ground during a protest. And a warning, some viewers may find these pictures confronting. The man is seen arguing with police before being shoved to the ground by one of the officers before he starts bleeding from the head. A number of police officers then walk past the man without offering help. Buffalo officials later confirmed the man is in hospital in a serious but stable condition. And the Governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, has taken to social media to condemn the actions of officers, saying the incident is wholly unjustified and utterly disgraceful. He goes on to say, I've spoken with Buffalo Mayor Brian Brown and we agreed that the officers involved should be immediately suspended pending a formal investigation, and police officers must enforce, not abuse the law. Several protesters who were forcibly cleared from an area near the White House to make way for a presidential photo op are suing President Donald Trump and other officials, arguing they violated the protesters' constitutional rights. President of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, Kristen Clark, explains the reasons for the suit.
Peaceful demonstrators have been assembling in Lafayette Square Park in the shadow of the White House to shine a light on police violence and racial violence in our country. And this past Monday, a number of peaceful demonstrators were doing just that. They were not provoking anyone. They were not assaulting anyone. There were children present, a group of peaceful, multiracial, multi-generational Americans speaking out against police brutality. And they were assaulted by U.S. Police officers, U.S. law enforcement, at the direction of President Trump and Attorney General Barr, who sought to immediately clear the area so that the president could get a photo op in front of the historic St. John's Church. This conduct is abhorrent and it violates the most basic core principles of our Constitution. And so we filed a lawsuit to make clear that this conduct can't stand in our democracy.
The first memorial service for George Floyd has been held in Minneapolis with family, civil rights activists and celebrities in attendance. North America correspondent James Glenday has more from Washington.
So, for another day, protesters have taken to streets across America. Things were a little quieter, a little bit more sombre today. Many of the people here had spent the afternoon watching a memorial service for George Floyd, the man who died at the hands of Minneapolis police late last month. Civil rights leaders, family and friends all attended the service. They were silent in prayer for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the exact amount of time a police officer had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck. All those who turned up vowed that his death would not be in vain and that things in the United States would change.
George Floyd's story has been the story of black folks, because ever since 401 years ago, the reason we could never be who we wanted and dreamed to be in is you kept your knee on our neck.
He touched so many people's hearts, you know, because he been touching our hearts, you know. You come to Third Ward, where we're from, people are crying right now. That's how much they love them. You know, I'm just staying strong as I can because I need to get it out. I need to get it out. Everybody wants justice. We want justice for George. He's going to get it. He's going to get it.
There are some signs that this movement is beginning to move the needle slightly. In the state of Virginia, the governor announced that a prominent statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee would be pulled down. Debate about it has raged for several years, and African-American lawmakers are delighted that something is finally being done. But they all expect that there will be protests in response.
In Hong Kong, tens of thousands of people have defied a ban on gatherings to mark the anniversary of China's Tiananmen Square massacre. There was a heavy police presence across the city as demonstrators ignored COVID-19 restrictions to stage memorials. Scuffles broke out when officers used pepper spray on protesters. Earlier in the day, there were heated scenes in Parliament when politicians approved a controversial bill making it illegal for people to disrespect China's national anthem. In the Philippines, tens of thousands of people may have been killed in the government's long-running campaign against drugs. The United Nations investigation found police enjoy near impunity and are virtually given permission to kill. President Rodrigo Duterte is yet to comment on the report, which will go before the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva later this month. Southeast Asia correspondent Ann Barker reports.
The death of a teenage drug suspect 3 years ago sparked fury on Manila's streets. The police who shot Kian de los Santos remain the only killers who've been convicted in the Philippines' war on drugs. A United Nations investigation has found the number of people killed in President Duterte's anti-drugs campaign could be in the tens of thousands.
The most conservative estimate we could come up with is at least 8,664 people killed. Some estimates range to 3 times that number.
The UN inquiry has found police are involved in many drug war deaths but enjoy near impunity. They don't need search or arrest warrants and systematically force suspects to make self-incriminating statements or risk being killed. Even the government's drug policy document, it says, uses language like neutralise.
We find that this may amount to permission to kill.
Investigators were shown evidence that police concoct the same stories over again to justify killing drug suspects and that they've planted guns on those they've killed.
We found that the serial numbers of guns that were found on the bodies of drug suspects matched in different crime scenes.
President Duterte refused to cooperate with the inquiry or even allow the UN team into the country, though government officials willingly gave evidence. Philippines police argue their actions in the anti-drugs campaign are lawful and that deaths have occurred in shootouts with dealers resisting arrest. The report calls for wide-ranging reforms to increase government accountability and the rule of law. Neither the government nor the president have made any comment. Ann Barker, ABC News.
Prosecutors investigating the disappearance of British girl Madeleine McCann are assuming she is dead. A German man has been identified as a key suspect. Police believe he was in Portugal at the time when she went missing from a holiday resort in 2007. Europe correspondent Samantha Hawley reports.
There's been leads before in the search for Madeleine McCann, but never like this one.
From this, you can see that we assume the girl is dead.
After almost 13 years comes the most significant development in the 3-year-old's disappearance and more heartache for her parents.
any development in the case of the German police mentions the word murder, of course, that's the worst possible outcome and the worst possible news to hear.
Under German privacy laws, the suspect, who's now in prison, is being referred to only as Christian B, a 43-year-old German man with a very dark past.
The accused has multiple previous convictions for sexual crimes. He's currently serving a long prison sentence for other offences.
In May 2007, the British girl vanished during a family holiday in Portugal. She'd been sleeping in an apartment while her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, dined with friends in a restaurant about 50 metres away. For more than a decade, the perpetrator has eluded police as the case gripped the world's press.
The only thing that would help right now is to find the little girl, to find her remains, and hopefully still be able to find DNA.
Police have released photos of this VW camper van the suspect is said to have slept in when he was living in Portugal, and of this 1993 Jaguar, which he registered into someone else's name the day after Madeleine went missing. Just last year, the British government extended funding for the police investigation. More than $20 million has been spent since 2011. It's the first appeal for information in 3 years. The McCanns say they've never given up hope of finding their daughter alive. Samantha Hawley, ABC News, London.
Let's return home. And the hospitality industry estimates the reopening of many pubs and bars tomorrow in Western Australia will reinstate up to 25,000 jobs across the state. The new rules don't come without challenges. There will be no mingling at the bar and customers must stay seated.
After weeks resembling a ghost town, watering holes in Fremantle are preparing to welcome back patrons. Nigel Sutton will open his Seafarers Bar for the first time in 10 weeks.
All right, Ollie, what do we need to get the bar open?
Under Phase 3 restrictions, venues must allow 2 square metres per person. That means this bar can host just 23 customers. Mr Sutton says it's touch and go whether he'll turn a profit or not.
I just want to open the doors for Fremantle, basically.
The marine surveyor gave up his job late last year to open the small bar, but just 4 months in, he had to close due to COVID-19.
Deflated. Yeah, just real sad, real sad.
But now there's new hope. Under the new rules, this hotel can host up to 290 patrons, about half its capacity, across 3 floors, including its rooftop. But contact tracing will continue and patrons must stay seated.
I'm putting on a weekend of live music to celebrate the fact we're reopening, so the major challenge is going to be chaining people to their chairs.
The industry says the new restrictions will be labour intensive.
The businesses are developing a way to be very flexible, but there are huge challenges.
Musicians will finally get gigs again, though some are taking pay cuts just to get back on stage.
As much as we've been hit hard, the venues have been hit hard as well.
Many pub goers are just looking forward to enjoying a drink.
Being able to sit down and have a beer without a meal is a fantastic thing. Life's almost complete. Just need the footy.
Not every venue in Fremantle has survived, but a recent survey found 8 out of 10 plan to reopen. Claire Moody, ABC News.
The Bushfire Royal Commission holds a promise that changes can be made to avoid a repeat of the summer disaster. Farmers in Victoria's northeast are also hoping for a brighter future, but the hard work to rebuild lives and businesses continues. Jess Davis reports.
The Cuneo Valley in northeast Victoria is teeming with new life.
As you can see, it's a whole lot greener now and looks a whole lot better than it did then. But there's still a lot of work to go to get it back to a fully operational farm.
But the green paddocks mask the blood, sweat and tears that have been spent here since January.
The initial recovery was really tough in that we were dealing with pretty total devastation on this farm.
On Craig McKimmy's dairy farm at Cuneo, an army of volunteers and friends came to help with the nearly 20 kilometres of fencing that needed to be repaired.
I'll be ever thankful for the people that have driven down the driveway and given their time, because also just the the mateship and just to have people around when you're going through some tough times.
The rain has helped Walwa farmer Janice Newnham get through a tough few months.
The fact that we don't have to feed and everything's green, it takes you out of the blackness, literally.
But it hasn't always been welcome.
Since the fires, we've had floods and silt rushes down the mountainside. We've had to de-silt dams. It's a never-ending story, I suppose, at the moment.
While the farmers here work on rebuilding, they hope the Bushfire Royal Commission will provide some answers.
They've just got to work through everything and hopefully come up with some resolutions and try and prevent this sort of thing happening ever again.
There will be fires again. Hopefully we don't get another big one like that for a long time.
It might be winter now, but the pain and suffering of the Black Summer bushfires remains. Jess Davis, ABC News, Cuneo.
Time for news in sport, and with the details on the Broncos' big loss to the Roosters in the NRL last night, here's Jared Coote.
Their handling was one issue, but their defence for the Broncos, he did his best to sum up what was a fairly miserable night for Brisbane.
The two times we got towed up, it's almost been men against boys, you know, but that's the reality of it is, you know, we got the youngest team in the comp now. I believe in the group. I don't think we're mentally weak. I thought we just couldn't handle the pressure of NRL tonight. Yeah, and so there's some big lessons for some of our group. And then we need a bit more out of some of the guys who played a little bit of football.
Yeah, so the only way is up really here for the Broncos. The Panthers and Warriors tonight as well, and the Storm taking on the Rabbitohs, a big one tonight, so plenty to look forward to. OK, so the NRL's house is in order, certainly as far as the competition and its broadcast deal. What's going on with the AFL? Well, they're looking at extending the broadcast deal now with 7 for a further 2 years, but of course it will come at a price, a reduced price for Channel 7. Foxtel are holding out for an even bigger discount, according to reports. But 7 want a cost reduction on their current deal in exchange for that extension. They want to save between 30 to 40 million for this season alone. Obviously, there's less games being shown, and they're saying there's less atmosphere, of course, with no crowds at the games. They were initially expected to pay 150 million for this year under the current deal. Of course, the current deal, 2.5 billion. It was a 6-year deal between Foxtel 7 and Telstra that runs until 2022. And we saw the NRL get an extension with Foxtel, but that was also at a bit of a cheaper rate. Gil McLachlan, though, the AFL CEO, he's pretty confident that they will get a deal done before the season restarts. That will be on Thursday. They'll certainly be hoping for that. But yeah, it still looks like there's plenty of work to do in those negotiations.
OK, now in basketball in the States, the NBA has come up with some sort of plan to resume the competition.
Yeah, that's right. So all 30 club owners had a vote. 29 out of the 30 agreed with what they wanted to get into. We can see some Premier League now. Let's talk about some Premier League instead for now. So what we do know about that is they will return on June 18, so a little before the NBA actually. 92 fixtures left. All will be on TV in the UK and Australia, so all the games will be visible. Liverpool 2 wins away from the title as well, so that'll be big for them. They could possibly wrap it up on their second game. That'll be on June 25 in Australia on a Thursday versus Crystal Palace, so I'm sure Reds fans have that lined up in their diary. But as for the NBA, yeah, July 31, it's set to start. 29 of the 30 club owners voted in favour of the restart. It'll all be at Disneyland in Orlando. 22 of the 30 teams will take part, so the top 8 from each conference and the 6 next closest teams. And then after that, they'll have a regular playoff series. So they're hoping to wrap it all up by October 12 at the latest.
Thanks, Jared. Let's check the weather. Here's Graham.
It was a very cold start across the southeast this morning, particularly over the inland areas. For New South Wales, we're actually going to see some of this cold air move much closer to the coast, with frost nearing the coast from the Hunter all the way down to the Victorian border. And already we're starting to see temperatures dropping across these areas, although South Australia is staying a little bit warmer at the moment. But all these regions that saw well into sub-zero temperatures this morning are already seeing those temperatures plunging as we lose the daylight. Now, it's all due to this high-pressure system that's causing this very cold weather. We've basically got light winds and clear skies underneath it. That's allowing the cold air to pool, and that's why we're seeing such significant cold conditions through Victoria, into New South Wales, South Australia, and also seeing some frost in Tasmania. At the moment, we have frost warnings out for Victoria and South Australia. We also have a road weather alert for icy road conditions for many parts of Tasmania. Now, as we move through the day tomorrow, we will start to see a few showers along the Queensland coast, but this is actually the 8-day rain forecast. So you can see that that high-pressure system really is going to dominate the weather for most of the continent. It's really only areas that are expected to see some onshore winds that are going to see some shower activity. So this trough will trigger a few showers on and south of the ranges in Victoria, the southern agricultural areas of South Australia, contracting back to the western far south of Tasmania. We'll also see them in an onshore wind flow along the Queensland coast and possibly up around the northeast corner of the territory. And a weak front moving towards Western Australia, also going to bring some showers and thunderstorms to the southwest Capes in the afternoon or evening. So not a great deal of rainfall at the capital areas. We are expecting to see some showers, though, developing for Perth on Sunday. Still showers along the coast of Queensland, and we'll start to see them redeveloping up the coast of New South Wales as winds begin to turn more onshore.
Graham, thanks very much. Remember, you can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on iView. Karina Carvalho is next. I'm Andrew Geoghegan. Thanks for watching.
This is an historic day. Across endless roads, chasing an endless horizon.
What a country we live in.
Join Heather on a trip across the mighty Nullarbor.
Not a bad life, you can say that. Yeah, fantastic life.
Backroads returns Monday at 8 on ABC and iView.
It's a bit like trying to do a Houdini trick.
The challenge of a COVID vaccine.
The battle does start in the lab, but the war will be won in the delivery.
And the hunt to find one.
Transparency is not a hallmark of the pharmaceutical industry.
Companies will make money from this. The coronavirus vaccine will be a blockbuster.
What we don't want is a level of vaccine nationalism. It's in nobody's interest.
Unless we do trials properly, we're in danger of getting the wrong result.
Four Corners, Monday, ABC and iView.
The Pirates of the Caribbean are back.
Today's Jack Sparrow is coming from just 14 kilometres offshore.
The home of Calypso and Windies cricket is being shaken to its core.
It's the sort of place where it's shoot first and ask questions later.
But the carnival must go on.
This is just Trinidad love.
Foreign Correspondent, Tuesday at 8.
Hello, I'm Ludwig van Beethoven, and I'll always be here for you. When you're full of joy or full of sorrow. I am there when you make history, make giant leaps, and when you're on hold with the power company. Are you there? And you can bet I will be here for you all weekend. It's a Classic 100 Beethoven, this weekend on ABC Classic and ABC Listen.
In these physically distant times when information and explanation are crucial, insiders will continue to show up at your place every Sunday morning. I'm David Spears. Our couch may be temporarily in storage, but we're still here to analyse the life and death decisions our leaders are making every day. Look forward to seeing you Sunday at 9.
These are difficult days and they may get much more difficult yet.
All sorts of parts of the body start to shut down.
So many of you have contacted us expressing genuine fear and anxiety.
I really want to see my grandma.
Hi, Nana! We're going to prioritise information and expertise over opinion and argument.
It's like planning for battle. We need to be less about the ideology.
This week on Q&A, from violent protests on the streets of America to confronting our own hard truths at home.
Monday. The best Aussie drama is yours to stream free on ABC iView.
I want you to know that I've seen things here.
Collections of outstanding titles, all in the one place.
Do I have your attention?
All ready to stream now.
Where I'm from, that's called a win-win.
Well, that's quite a sales pitch.
ABC iView, yours to stream.